Amazon in general, you know this, there's not a whole lot of like structure. So even though there are more senior PMs, they're not like sitting you down and being like, okay, this is how you run a backlog.
Yeah.
This is how you like participate in a sprint meeting. It's kind of like you just get thrown in. And I actually think it was really good training. I think there's a lot of ways you can be a good PM, but one of them, and I think the way that's worked best for me, is just understanding where you can add value.
Wes, cheers.
Cheers, man.
Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah, it's an honor to be here.
So would love to kind of just kick things off with telling everyone a little bit about you.
Yeah, absolutely. I started out in consulting at undergrad, and I bounced around a couple different teams and settled in like in a emerging tech incubator role within BBC at the time. And after doing that for a couple years, I wanted to become a real product manager. And for me, that meant going to business school and getting a MBA. And I also did a degree in design, dual degree.
What made you kind of feel like going the MBA route was a route that made sense given your situation?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably still true today, but product is really hard to break into. And they were looking for people who had experience. And as much as I tried to make my resume seem like I was a product manager at PwC, I think it was pretty clear that I wasn't. I knew there was this kind of pathway out of MBA into a lot of the big companies where you get more training and you get to learn. So
then you went to business school, you went to Kellogg, did your 2 years there, and maybe talk a little bit about how you kind of landed at Amazon.
So a lot of the big tech companies recruit on campus. I had Apple, Google, Amazon interviews all happening right at the same time, which was really stressful. I feel like product is so different company to company that it seemed like the consulting and banking interviews, which is the other kind of big career path out of MBA, you kind of know what to prep for. But like Amazon and Apple were super different interview processes. And so it almost was like preparing for two different industries. So you just kind of, it's a really tough couple months, but you at least just knock everything all out at once, which is good.
And then how is it like for getting access to startups at kind of any stage? Were they on campus also with these big tech companies, or did you have to seek those out more on your own?
There's a lot of, Kellogg alumni that are in the entrepreneurship space, startup space more generally. And so that it was almost all networking driven. Those companies aren't coming on campus. It's almost always someone who's there, who's an alumni, or they're in the Chicago area. And so they're kind of nearby. I had a couple conversations with startups that came through just, usually it was like a Kellogg alumni who was reaching back out saying, hey, we're hiring for this specific role.
I guess looking back at your time in your MBA, is there anything else that you felt really like was able to kind of push you over and like level you up there as part of that?
The skill set in MBA, it's just very multidisciplinary, which I think is very similar to product. Like this schedule of an average day in MBA is actually, I think, pretty similar to being in product. So starting to build that muscle of like being able to jump in and out of things, learn things quickly, communicate with a lot of different types of people with different skill sets. That to me was the biggest like skill that I built at MBA.
I think as you're speaking, I'm realizing like you have to context switch a lot. You have to learn how to solve a problem. And I guess you get a lot of that type of training through an MBA that makes you more like a natural fit.
I don't know how typical it is at other companies, but I think, Amazon, the whole ethos is like hire athletes, like people who you can plug into a different role. The expectation is that you're going to be able to ramp up quickly for whatever it requires and don't even really care about your background or skill set or what you've done before. It's much more about like, are you the type of person who can like quickly adapt to a new scenario? So
I think there's a lot of people may not know this, but I think internally, I assume this still exists, but at Amazon, when we hired, it was always about, is this candidate better than 50% of the employers that we currently have?
Yeah.
And obviously Amazon's at a whole different scale now, but I imagine more or less that principle still applies. And I thought that was a very interesting bar to have for talent, I think it raises the bar more or less with who you hire.
Yeah, I think the 50% rule is interesting. I don't know how strictly people adhere to it now. I think
Yeah.
it's obviously probably impossible to actually measure, but
Right.
the idea is I think holds true, which is that a bad hire is worse than no hire. So you will see roles on teams sit open for probably a lot longer than normal because they're unwilling to hire someone who they think isn't going to be a good fit.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about the interview process.
So every Amazon interview is structured the same way as far as I know. It's 4 interviews, 45 minutes each. You'll interview with typically 3 people who are on the hiring team, and then one person who's called a bar raiser, who's the kind of what you're talking about. They're specially trained in evaluating whether or not you raise the bar at Amazon.
Did you have an initial hiring manager interview as part of your process before you got to that? Like how did you get to that stage?
So out of the MBA, you pretty much just went, there was, I'm sure, like some kind of resume screen. They also do something what I think is pretty unique, which was
It's like a test, right?
yeah, it's a test. And it's like, they give you a bunch of situations. It's not, as far as I remember, it's not like the SAT where you're doing like math and logic and reasoning. It's more like,
Is that live or is that like you're with someone else on the other side?
no, you're on a computer. Yeah, it's on a
Okay.
computer, and you have like a time limit, I think. And it's like, here's a situation. You get this email from your boss. What do you do? And then you have like a couple options that you can pick from. And I think they're really testing for cultural fit. Again, like the emphasis, I think, in recruiting is really on, are you a culture fit and are you kind of like adaptable?
Yeah.
And less about like, do you have XYZ skill set that we need, especially when you're coming out of MBA, because they don't even know where you're going to be placed at that point.
Are you writing stuff into that, or is that all multiple choice? How is it typically formatted?
It was multiple choice from what I remember. I think we'll see more of that, especially with AI, where it's like you can have this kind of screen at some point where it's like, hey, let's assess whether or not this is a good cultural fit before you go through all the interviews.
I think that could maybe even replace a recruiter screen eventually. My kind of hot take on this space is that I think the role of the recruiter should evolve into being more of like almost like a relationship manager.
Yeah.
Like think of a recruiter as like having a bench of candidates ready to kind of fill the pipeline, and they're focusing their time on nurturing those relationships. And then you feed them into the process. AI can help with this screen, and then they kind of move over to the next round with the hiring manager, I guess, would probably be the next thing. But yeah, I feel like that's an area where there's a lot of opportunity to leverage AI. So let's fast forward into you joining Amazon.
Out of MBA, you just kind of get assigned to a team. You have no control over where you go.
Okay.
So I was on Amazon Business on an international team. My first project was like working on international expansion in Europe. My engineering team was in Spain. Everything I was launching was in Central Europe, and I was in Seattle. So it was like,
Wow,
could not have been worse from like a time perspective.
Yeah.
So I was like, meetings started at 7 a.m. every day.
Wow.
And it was like 7 to 10 was just jam packed with meetings. So it was really tough. And there weren't a lot of people from my team in Seattle at that time. So, thinking about like the product, a lot of product management is relationships, and especially for like really technical products, sitting with engineers and understanding how things work. And so I didn't have really any of that to start. And so I got to travel overseas once while I was there, but that was it. And so trying to build those relationships, get up to speed quickly, it was really hard.
So you're coming in as essentially like a fresh grad. You're working with a bunch of other senior PMs and above that have probably been there for a while. Like, was there some of that imposter syndrome that kicked in? Like, how did you feel that you could kind of adapt to the culture there?
Amazon, I mean, in general, you know this from working there, there's not a whole lot of like structure. So even though there are more senior PMs, they're not like sitting you down and being like, okay, this is how you run a backlog.
Yeah.
This is how you like participate in a sprint meeting. It's kind of like you just get thrown in and
Thrown into the fire.
right. And I actually think it was really good training. I think there's a lot of ways you can be a good PM, but one of them, and I think the way that's worked best for me, is just understanding like where you can add value. And I think at the end of the day, a good rule of thumb is like, if you are making it easier for engineers to do their job, that then you're being a good PM. You can boil down a lot of product management to just that. And so coming in, yeah, with no experience, not really knowing the product, being far away, I was just focused on like, okay, where are the problems right now that are preventing us from launching? The product I joined had been in a pilot for like 2 years, and they kept getting blocked launching it fully. And so that was kind of the context I was coming into. So there's a lot of big problems that needed to be solved. And just having the mindset of where can I jump in? Where can I be proactive? What are the things that are broken? And so I think it was a good, yeah, almost like humbling experience where it's like, that's all I could do. Cause I didn't have the skills to do anything more valuable. And I also didn't have the access to the team to really be leading or driving anything.
Did you have peers of yours that came from Kellogg and or other MBA programs that you could rely on as like a safety net to kind of share some of these struggles, or were you just kind of figuring it out for your own mainly?
Yeah, we had a like support group. It was me and there were 3 other PMs that joined at the same times. And yeah, we just had like a weekly session where we all kind of got together and talked. It was,
It's like a venting session.
yeah, it ranged from like product management tools of the trade to therapy, depending on the week. I think it was just helpful understanding like, okay, this is the job, right? Like, I think a lot of times you get into these situations, it's easy to be like doubting yourself, like, oh, am I doing a bad job? Or is this like really unusual, bad situation? And just talking to other people and realizing, oh, they're all going through pretty much the same thing as me was really helpful, because it kind of helps you understand like, okay, being a product manager a lot of times is stepping into these really chaotic situations and being able to like bring order and structure to it.
That's awesome. I feel like that type of peer community is very rare nowadays. And I feel like having that, especially with folks that are going through that experience early in your career, is really good. I feel like that's something that more companies should try and encourage. I think it would just make the product community stronger overall.
I think it's hard to foster that like in a structured way within a company, but if it happens organically, especially if you find someone who's more senior who's willing to mentor you, which I got very lucky that I had actually one of my interviewers when I was interviewing as an MBA wanted to stay in touch. He mentored me for a year. I ended up joining his team, which is the team I'm on now. He hired me into this role. But I think having that outlet of someone who's going through the same thing, either more senior or a peer who's not, like you said, not on your team, is super, super critical just to keeping your sanity.
I think the route that you took is a route that I also agree with, where it's got to happen naturally. And almost like not calling that person a mentor is almost better than officially calling them a mentor. It takes the pressure off.
Yeah.
And like I've had a lot of people that are more senior to me that I talk to and are probably really mentors, but I don't really call them that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think having that opportunity to just like reach out to someone when you're stuck is really awesome. And
it is so hard. It's so hard to keep that going. And I think to some extent you need like, there needs to be some kind of stickiness there, especially for the person mentoring, because it is a lot of time and energy. Like,
yeah, you can't force it. Like it's got to be like organic.
They have to want to do it, I think, and like either enjoy the mentorship process, or I think in some cases you're kind of like almost cultivating potential people to hire later on in your career. And I don't think that that's what my mentor is necessarily doing intentionally, but it just worked out that way. And obviously, if you've been talking to someone for a while, you have a relationship with them, you know how they approach problems, like you feel much more comfortable hiring them. It's definitely a long-term play, but like starting to think about, okay, I'm moving up in the ranks. Like, how do I start like building a relationship with these junior people? Maybe I won't hire them, but like maybe they will have like a recommendation for me to hire. I think that makes a huge difference. Like that really starts to pay dividends later in your career when you have like a network of people kind of at that level below you who you can go and talk to and even get like hiring recommendations from.
So would love to hear about your transition internally. You moved through a bunch of different teams, but more so you also got promoted. It can be very grueling at Amazon where you're essentially you're in charge of your own career, but at the same time, it's got to be the right timing. And so
Yeah.
talk through some of that struggle a little bit. And then kind of how you got to eventually being able to push getting promoted to principal.
Yeah, it was tough. It was basically like another job on top of, the regular job. Right? It's definitely, it can be an opaque process. It changes a lot. I think it depends too on your role. I think going, especially if you're in the tech org, there's like a tech bar and assessment that happens, which is kind of like an added level of complexity that's challenging. But yeah, I mean, I went up a couple times before I ended up getting it. The hardest part is knowing where you stand with people in the org, like the people who are making the decisions about the promotion. I think a lot of people have the body of work to get promoted or like the skills. And so then it becomes a lot about some of his org dynamics. Like how many people can you promote? How many other people are at your level? And so there's a lot happening that is outside of the kind of like your direct body of work.
The intention is probably to do right by the employees, to kind of give everyone a shot in the scope of the organization, but that probably results in this like waiting game that you had to basically go through of like waiting for your time.
Yeah. I mean, I think it is reflective of what it's like to be a PM in a lot of ways. And I think in theory, when you think of meritocracy, it's like, well, the work I'm doing is at the next level, so I should get promoted. But I think that's not how things work.
Yeah.
And that's also not how things work with projects. Like just because you're working on a good high value project doesn't mean that it's going to be successful. Like you also have to understand, especially at a big company, like who are the people who can block this or will make this successful? How do I get in front of them? How do I identify them? How do I influence them? Like that is what being a PM is, I think, in a lot of ways, especially when you get up to principal level. Like your job is kind of unblocking, understanding the organization, understanding what it takes to launch products. And that is, now when I look back on the promotion process, that is basically what the promotion process was. Like I had the body of work to get promoted probably a year before I actually got promoted, I think at least. And I got put up for it. So I think so. But what really changed in the year before I got promoted was I understood like, okay, these are the dynamics in our org right now. Like we are growing really fast. So we are trying to pull more people up into these senior roles. There are a handful of people who are making these decisions. And like those are the people who need to know about the work I'm doing and need to be convinced that that it's worth getting promoted. And after the first cycle, we kind of identified there are a couple people who maybe like weren't as familiar with my work or hadn't seen like what they needed to see yet. And so then the focus shifted to like, okay, how do we like go and influence these people? Which again, I think that can be painted in like a very negative, like politicking light, but that's the job as a PM. Like your job as a PM is to like understand who the people are that are making these decisions, who has resources to fund projects, who can block a launch, like, and then going and convincing them. And so it was, looking back, I think it was a good exercise in kind of understanding how those organizational dynamics work.
Yeah, I think that's a really good insight. I think that a lot of PMs can get into this state of like, I'm working really hard, so I deserve to be promoted. I think it's not just about working hard. I think there's like some purposeful direction that you need to make sure you're going in. And
I mean, people say like ideas are cheap. There's a lot of people have good ideas. And there are a lot of really good candidates, right? Like people who have done good work that probably deserve to be promoted. And the challenge, especially when you get to the more senior levels, is like, how do you actually execute on that? Like, how do you make it happen? And to me, a lot of that is, being able to read the room, being able to understand the organizational dynamics and actually being able to make things happen. And that's why, those relationships, your relationship with leadership, like all that stuff really starts to matter more the more senior you get as a PM, because you have access to people who, will have information about like, how many people are we putting up for promotion this year? Or what are the, what is leadership thinking? What are VPs thinking about like the future of this organization or like the products that we're trying to launch, right? Like you could have a great product. This has happened to me where we have a great product that is demonstrating a lot of value and then it just gets shut down because the organization's going a different way. And that's super frustrating sometimes. But I think that really good PMs can kind of like read the tea leaves. They can see the signs of that happening and can adjust course. So it's like, if you're just marching and you're building and that's all you're focused on, sure, you might build a great product, but like it might never see the light of day because you just got the timing wrong or you didn't understand like the vision of your organization. And that is important. Like that's part of the job.
I think that goes back to the adapting piece that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
I think like you have to constantly adapt. I think building that muscle early on helps gear you up for these inevitably more senior moments that you get in your career. And then so once you got promoted, did anything change? Like, do you feel like people viewed you differently? Did you get kind of more scope automatically? Like what happened the day you got promoted?
Oh man, probably have had a glass of champagne or something. I don't know. That's probably really the only thing that actually.
Actually, when I got promoted, my manager brought me a mini champagne bottle at the office, and he actually shared the good news with me. With like, we got these like plastic cups. I think he had it like hidden, and we went into our like career review because we were pushing for it too.
Yeah.
And then he like took it out and said, "We're ready to celebrate." So I thought that was actually kind of funny.
Wow.
That just reminded me that.
That was at Amazon?
Yeah, that was at Amazon.
Man, that's really nice. That's pretty unusual. Usually it's you get a phone call or something, but yeah. So it's not like a switch gets flipped. I do think eventually the expectations for what you're going to work on change. At a big company, like it does make a difference to have principal next to your title, or at Amazon it's L7. I think it does just give you a little more credibility. Same with the badges. Like if you see someone who's got a red badge, they've been at Amazon for 10 years, like
so many of them now.
Right. Odds are if you've made it that long, you're pretty sharp. And so I think, it is surface level observation. Like sometimes maybe it doesn't end up being true, but yeah, generally I think people who make it to L7 level, like have proven themselves. And so you get a little bit more respect. But I think the things that really start to change at the next level are, I think there's two things. I think one is the scope of your responsibility. Like you go from managing like one product to a suite of products. And I think the biggest inflection point there is you start to have more scope than you can manage on your own.
I see.
And that's a big change. Going from like, I can just, if I need to grind all night and get this done, I can do it, to like, it's not possible to do this all at once. And so that changes, I think, the dynamics of how you manage a team and how you plan ahead, because you have to be looking further ahead when you have that much scope.
So then how do you like balance your time then? Because like, you have suite products, you're still an IC. Is it just that you've figured out how to get more leverage and you know how to kind of figure out what's the highest priority?
Yeah, I think leverage is a good word. At Amazon, they talk a lot about mechanisms. It's like, what are the things that you can put in place that add structure that can kind of operate continuously? So like, I think the simple example is like a stand-up meeting. It's like, no one has to think every day, hey, I need to get all of the engineers and the product person together to like touch base on what we're doing. We just have a meeting every day. We just go and do that. There's an agenda. We know what to do, right? That, I think, is the biggest unlock to expanding your leverage, is putting in place mechanisms. Like, what are the things that I can put in place that will start happening automatically without me? I've identified this problem. It keeps popping up. Okay, let's have a recurring mechanism, a meeting that happens every week. Let's build, an automated product that measures XYZ metric and then takes some automatic action whenever something gets out of whack, right? Like, those are the things you start putting in place. So then you don't have to think about them anymore. So I think it's like building a habit. It's like, if you start waking up and going to the gym at 6 a.m. every day,
right?
You don't even, at some point you just stop thinking about it. It just happens.
Yeah.
And like, you need to do the same thing to expand your scope. You have to start automating those easy decisions. You have to start being able to pass them off to people on the team, add structure to them, and then that allows you to go focus on other things. And then you can trust that, like, okay, these other things are going to happen on their own. I don't need to be involved in these day to day. if something blows up, then you have to jump in and every once in a while. But I think the key is figuring out how to make those continue without you.
Do you feel like you're in more meetings now or less meetings now?
I mean, I'm definitely in more now. I just took over like a new product scope, and so there's just more people now, and it's so new that I haven't set up those mechanisms. Like I think I feel it right now, like the difference between where I was with my last product and this one, where it's like it's still early stages. There's a lot of kind of chaos as I'm like stepping in and trying to put the structure that works best for me in place. So yeah, I'm in a lot of meetings answering a lot of the same questions. And yeah, my mind is going towards like, okay, how do we automate this? Like, how do I make it so I don't have to be in this meeting? Is there someone else who can come to this meeting who can be answering these questions better? Because PM is the default. If it's like,
Right.
it's like this product, I have to do something with it. I don't know who to talk to. I'm just going to ask.
It's always going to be
PM.
Yep.
And so I think it takes a while to figure out like, okay, who do they actually need to talk to?
Yeah.
And how do we like set up this meeting to be productive so that's not a waste of this other person's time? And then that's how you slowly remove yourself from having to be in a million meetings. I'm sure someone will find another reason to invite me to be.
There's always ways to cut it.
It's never ending, but at least you start to like automate some of those things.
And then, so now that you're kind of at this more senior level as principal, where do you feel like you can start to stretch yourself more to expand your skill set as a PM? Because now getting at Amazon, going from principal to director is, I think a lot of people don't realize, like that's a really, really big step. Externally, a director title is very different than like getting promoted within a big tech company like Amazon. And so I imagine that horizon is longer. So like, what can you do and what are you thinking about in terms of growing that skill set?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we just talked about, I think, one of the big areas, which is how do you structure a team? How do you set up like a kind of like playbook to execute on things beyond your direct reach? Like that is the foundational thing.
You're essentially like learning how to almost delegate without even having that authority yet from like a manager standpoint.
I think so. I mean, I think it's more similar to being like a coach of a sports team where it's like you are trying to set everyone else up to be successful.
Yeah.
And I think that's the mentality that you need to have. And I think everyone wants to do better at their job, have less work that they don't find meaningful. So like as a PM, the better I am at doing that, like setting other people up to be successful, the more responsibility they can take on, the less things that I'm having to jump into. Next step is, what new things are you bringing in? I think there's probably two ways to get promoted. One is you just kind of wait for the person who's in the director role or whatever to get promoted. And then there's one spot and you're probably competing with a bunch of people for that. And that's definitely a viable path if you're playing the longer game.
Yep.
But the people I've seen be most successful build something new. Like they figure out, okay, this is the product space I'm operating in. What's a tangential problem, a space that we can take this that hasn't happened before?
I see.
A new product we can stand up, a new area we can access. And then that's how you, I think, build momentum. Like you identify an opportunity, you get funding, and then you just start building out a team on your own.
So the ball's in your court, basically, like more so than maybe it was in the past, where you're empowered to go find the next problem or the next opportunity.
I'd say expected to solve.
I see.
Like I think, again, if you're willing to wait like 7-8 years for that role to open up and you think you have the kind of political capital to get promoted into that role, then that is one path. But I think the better path and the expectation is that you are figuring out how to build a new business. And then that helps you rise up. Because if you have enough of an opportunity, you're going to be able to get resources to come and work on this problem. And then that is going to build your team naturally. And then eventually you're going to get to a point where now you have a director size work. And then that's when you get promoted. Versus waiting and getting, I think it's like formal versus informal. Like getting formally promoted in a position where you're overseeing something that exists versus building something new. Even at like a very structured big company like Amazon or Google, again, people I've seen be most successful and also enjoy their job the most are the ones who are like not just accepting the scope that's in front of them. They're like, what other problems can I go solve? And how do I like convince people to give me the resources to go do it? It's, yeah, very similar to being an entrepreneur where you're not taking what's given to you. You're going out and kind of seeking this opportunity.
Or what are some like mechanisms, I guess, that you use to give yourself the time, but also doing so in a way that doesn't completely burn you out?
I mean, I thought a lot about this because I think understanding what stage you're in is really helpful and also takes a lot of pressure off. And sometimes that can be the stage of the product where it's like you're in an early stage product, you're in a mature product, like the dynamics and how you're spending your time is going to be very different in both of those. So like right now, the product I'm working on is very mature, but like I am in the early stages where I need to focus my time on understanding the product, understanding the existing space, and like what we should be doing. I don't have time to be doing that creative thinking. And that can be very frustrating sometimes because once you have an eye towards like, oh, I should be going and creating my own role, that obviously sounds great. Like you want to focus on that, but you have to get the basics right first. I feel like having that mentality has taken a lot of pressure off of me where I'm like, okay, right now we're in the stage where like I need to get up to speed. I need to figure out how to like put in place the structure that makes sense for this team and how to get our existing projects and roadmap on track. And once that happens, then I can start thinking about other things. And it's not just going to happen naturally. Like we said, people will fill up your calendar, especially as a PM, with whatever time you have available. So you do have to be very deliberate about saying no to things and being clear on like, this is what we're focusing on. This is what we're not focusing on. And then that's how you block things out. But having a really coherent vision of like what your current product space is supposed to be, that helps you say no to things. And then setting up those mechanisms that allow the team to like be functioning highly without you involved. And if you have those two things, then you can start focusing on what's next. I think that's what I mean by the stage is like, once you get to that stage, then you can start thinking about other things.
I think that's a really strong signal of a product person who is kind of developed in a way that basically allows them to kind of build on their skill set over time. Whereas I feel like there are PMs that I know who have maybe peaked too early or not necessarily gotten the right kind of foundational skill sets. And then they get into these roles and they're running around with their heads cut off.
A lot of people in product are like really, driven. You probably had success before. It's a hard industry to break into. And so you have very high expectations for yourself. But yeah, I love the like coaching metaphors. Like I played sports a lot growing up. So I think they resonate a lot. But if you're a professional football team, like when you start practice, the first thing you do is just like the basic blocking and tackling. Same with basketball. Like you build the fundamentals, you get the like basics down, and then you start doing, the trick plays and the fun stuff comes after that. But like you have to have the fundamentals down. And I think that it's very similar to product. You have to have an intake process. You have to have a prioritization framework. You have to have a backlog. You have to get those things in place so that the now is clear. The engineering team knows what they're doing now. They're knowing what is coming next. If you don't have that, it's just going to be chaos. And if you start trying to focus on other things before you have those basics down, it's going to cause a lot of problems down the line.
Maybe we should just get all PMs to play sports. And I think we solve this problem. Maybe there's a sports community around product management that we can create. I think there's a lot of similarities. I agree. I think teamwork, collaboration, depending on others, like the PM is the quarterback or the coach. Like you could kind of make many metaphors there, but they're definitely not the CEO. I think that's what we were taught earlier in our career. It's like technically from like a strategic standpoint, you may be a CEO, but you have no authority, and that makes a huge difference. And so influencing as a team member, I think, goes a long way. And doing that in a way that actually motivates others around you to kind of row in the same direction is I think a really good trait, an underrated trait in PMs.
Yeah, I think the influence without authority, for sure. I think the approach to that's worked for me is like being able to put yourself in a position to help people and having that mentality. Going back to the coaching metaphor, or like if you're playing on a basketball team, it's like, okay, who are the superstars in this team? Where are the areas where we're not quite as good that we need, that like I might need to step in and help?
Like what's my role?
Right, exactly. If you have like a really, really strong engineer lead who's been doing something for a while, or like a really strong UX person who's great. You can just kind of let them do their thing. You don't need to be involved in making decisions there. Your job should be, how do I make this person as successful, as productive as possible? A lot of that is like observing, just understanding the dynamics of the team, understanding where the team is going, the problems that you're likely to face down the line, and then like being proactive about fixing that.
Yeah, I think that we're problem solvers at the end of the day. Find a problem, figure out how to solve it. It doesn't have to be you that solves the problem necessarily every time. But I think identifying that is probably the most important thing. And then prioritizing it. And like you're prioritizing what's important for you to learn in your career. You're prioritizing what type of jobs to go after. You're prioritizing what work to do in your product. I think that skill just continues to grow and multiply in different parts of your life. And I think that's really cool. I think that if you can get as a PM, the rest of your team that are non-PMs to actually feel like PMs, I think you're a winner. Because that makes your job easier. Everyone is invested in the product. Everyone's invested in the direction that you're going. Ideas come from all angles, not just from the PMs. There's an open space for debate, which I think makes for a better product ultimately. And I think that makes it more fun. So that's what I try to do too. It's like, how do we get everyone super pumped about what we're working on so they feel like they're part of the problem? Because looking back, how would you think about your journey so far and what you would give yourself advice on?
I would say lean into your strengths more, trust your strengths. I do think like there's that, like you said, that imposter syndrome where you're like, everyone knows what they're doing. There's this dance I need to learn of being a PM, and like there's a certain way to do it. And I think I've seen now so many different types of successful PMs. Some people are like more unstructured, and I think I'm much more on like the structured side, where I'd like to have things very like clearly documented. Like, but there's many ways to be successful. So like not putting as much pressure on myself to try to figure out what the right way to do it is. Just go with what works for you. And I think if I had learned that early on in my career, I would have spent more time leaning into the, organization side of things. Just like figure out what makes sense for you and then do that, because there are a lot of different ways to be a product manager. And it's not to say that the like, books and stuff aren't helpful directionally, but it shouldn't be like, this is the, Bible that I need to follow. It's more, hey, these are some ideas. These are things that work for some people. Take the pieces that work and be willing to scrap the ones that don't.
I think, as they say at Amazon, lean into your superpowers. And I actually really like that, because no one is going to be perfect. And you can go your whole career trying to kind of level up in the areas where you're really weak in and just make yourself perfect in all angles, and you'll never get to that point. And I think figure out where you spike and double down on that, like you said. And I think that will allow you to also carve yourself out as a specific type of PM. And I think that's good. Awesome. Wes, thanks for coming. Thanks for being on the podcast. And we'll see you around.